The Amaranth was dying. Captain knew this the way a mother knows when her child is sick. She could feel it in the trembling of the deck plates beneath her feet. She could hear it in the wheeze of the air recyclers that struggled to keep 200 souls breathing. She could see it in the faces of her crew, who smiled less with each passing week. The ship had never been built for this. 300 years ago, the Amaranth was a colony vessel designed to carry farmers and teachers and dreamers to new worlds. She was meant for slow, peaceful journeys between friendly stars. Her hull was thin. Her engines were weak. Her weapons were mining lasers that could barely scratch an asteroid. Now she carried the last survivors of Earth's 7th Fleet, running from a war they had already lost. Stood on the bridge and watched the stars drift past the cracked viewport. Behind them, somewhere in the darkness, Earth was gone. The great human fleets that had protected there for 2 centuries were scattered and burning. The collapse had come so fast that no one had time to understand it. One day, humanity was reaching for the stars. The next day, they were running from them. The bridge was quiet. Navigator sat hunched over his console, plotting courses through empty space. Engineer worked beneath a panel, trying to coax another week of life from systems that should have failed months ago. Communications officer listened to static, hoping to hear another human voice somewhere in the void. They had been running for 8 months. Their food was almost gone. Their water recyclers were failing. Their oxygen would last perhaps 3 more weeks if they were lucky. Had made peace with death. She had watched too many friends die to fear it anymore, but she had not made peace with failing her crew. These people had trusted her to save them. They had followed her into the darkness because she had promised them hope. She had no hope left to give. The sensor console beeped, looked up, her eyes wide. For a moment felt her heart lift. Perhaps it was another human ship. Perhaps they were not alone after all. Then's face went pale. "Captain," she said, "we have contacts, 12 ships. They are not human." The Dominion had ruled this part of the galaxy for 10,000 years, had heard stories about them before the collapse. They were ancient. They were powerful. They had conquered over 300 star systems and enslaved dozens of species. To them, the galaxy was a garden, and every other race was either a flower to be cultivated or a weed to be pulled. Humans had never met the Earth was too far from their territory, too small to notice. But now the Amaranth had drifted into their space, and there was nowhere left to run. The ships surrounded them within minutes. They were beautiful in a terrible way, all curved lines and glowing cores, like predators made of light and metal. Any one of them could have destroyed the Amaranth with a single shot. Together, they were a wall of death. A transmission came through, put it on the main screen. The ambassador was tall, nearly 3 meters, with a body covered in dark chitin that gleamed like polished armor. Its eyes were clusters of red orbs that seemed to look in every direction at once. When it spoke, its voice was translated into human language by some technology could not understand. "Primitive vessel," the ambassador said, "you have entered the territory of the Dominion. Identify yourselves." Stood straight. She was a small woman, barely tall enough to reach the ambassador's chest, but she had commanded warships and led soldiers into battle. She would not show fear. "I am captain of the human vessel Amaranth. We are refugees. Our has been destroyed. We seek only safe passage." The ambassador made a sound that might have been laughter. It was an ugly sound, like stones grinding together. "Humans," it said, "we have heard of your kind, a young species. Primitive, you have no fleet, no empire, no value." The ambassador leaned closer to the screen, its red eyes gleaming. "Your vessel is so weak it barely registers on our sensors. It is a wonder you survived this long." "We are survivors," said. "That is what humans do." "Not anymore," the ambassador replied. "By the authority of the Dominion, I claim this vessel and all souls aboard as property of the Empire. You will be taken to our processing stations. You will serve the Dominion. You will work until you die. This is your fate." The screen went dark. Around, her crew sat in silence. She could see the fear in their eyes, the despair. They had run so far and fought so hard, only to end up as slaves to an empire that saw them as insects. Climbed out from under the panel. His hands were covered in grease, and his face was tired. "Captain," he said quietly, "we could fight. The mining lasers might damage one of their ships if we got close enough." Shook her head. "And then they would destroy us all. No, we survive. That is what matters now." "Survive as slaves?" asked. There was bitterness in his voice. "Survive," repeated. "That is enough. For now, that is enough." The ships extended towing beams and locked onto the Amaranth. The old colony vessel shuddered as she was pulled forward, helpless as a fish caught in a net. Watched through the viewport as they were dragged toward the largest ship. She thought about Earth. She thought about the billions of humans who had died in the collapse. She thought about the great fleets that had burned. And she thought about her crew, 200 people who were still alive, 200 people who still had a chance. They saw humans as weak, as primitive, as worthless. They looked at the Amaranth and saw garbage. They looked at her crew and saw tools to be used and thrown away. They did not understand what they had captured. Humans had survived ice ages. They had survived plagues. They had survived wars that killed hundreds of millions. They had crawled out of caves and reached for the stars. They did not know how to give up. They did not know how to stop fighting. They would learn this lesson. It would take time. It would take patience. It would take sacrifice. But they would learn. As the Amaranth was swallowed by the belly of the ship, allowed herself one small smile. It was not a happy smile. It was the smile of a woman who had nothing left to lose. The galaxy thought humanity was finished. The galaxy was wrong. The processing station orbited a dead world called Seven. It was a massive structure, all metal and harsh lights, built to sort and distribute the Dominion's endless supply of slaves. Thousands of beings passed through its halls every day, stripped of their names and given numbers, assigned to labor camps across the empire. The humans were separated the moment they arrived. Families were torn apart. Friends were sent to different worlds. They did this on purpose. They had learned long ago that slaves who had no one to care about were easier to control. Was sent to a mining colony on 4. Was sent to an orbital factory above the gas giant. Was sent to a communications relay station at the edge of the sector. Was sent to a cargo hauler that moved between systems. They were scattered like seeds thrown into the wind. They expected them to break. Other species had broken before them. The proud warriors had become obedient workers within 2 generations. The clever had forgotten their own language within a century. The Dominion was patient. It had ground entire civilizations into dust. But humans were different. On 4 worked in the deep mines, digging for minerals that powered the Dominion's ships. The work was hard and dangerous. The air was thick with dust. Many workers died from exhaustion or accidents. The overseers did not care. There were always more slaves. Watched and learned. She noticed things they missed. She saw mineral veins that ran deeper than the current tunnels reached. She saw structural weaknesses in the mine shafts that could cause collapses. She saw patterns in the rock that told stories the aliens could not read. She shared this knowledge with the other human workers, quietly, carefully. They began to find better routes through the mines. They began to avoid the dangerous areas. Their survival rate improved. The overseers noticed that the human workers were more efficient than expected. They did not understand why. They simply reported that humans made acceptable miners and requested more. On the orbital factories worked on assembly lines that built components for Dominion ships. The work was repetitive and mind-numbing. The same task, over and over, for 16 hours a day. But was an engineer. He could not stop his mind from working. He studied the components he assembled. He learned how technology functioned. He found inefficiencies in the designs, places where small changes could improve performance by significant amounts. At first, he kept this knowledge to himself. Then he began to make tiny adjustments, nothing the overseers would notice. A wire rerouted here, a connection improved there. The components he assembled worked 18% better than the standard models. They did not notice. They assumed their technology was perfect. They did not check. Began teaching other human workers. They spread across the factory, making small improvements everywhere they went. Within a year, the orbital factory had become the most efficient production facility in the sector. The overseers took credit for this success. They received promotions and rewards. They never suspected that their slaves were the true cause. On the communications relay station, listened to the voices of the Dominion. She processed thousands of transmissions every day, sorting and routing messages across the sector. The work was tedious, but it gave her access to information. She learned the patrol routes of ships. She learned the locations of supply depots and military bases. She learned the codes used to communicate between stations. She memorized everything. More importantly, she found a way to send hidden messages. Buried in the static between official transmissions, she could encode tiny packets of data that the systems could not detect. She began reaching out to other humans across the sector. The network grew slowly. A message here, a response there. Humans on different worlds began to communicate in whispers that the Dominion could not hear. And on his cargo hauler traveled between systems, delivering supplies to colonies and stations throughout the sector. He was just a worker, invisible to the who commanded the ship. But his position gave him something precious: mobility. He became a courier. He carried physical messages hidden in his clothing. He memorized information and delivered it in person. He connected the scattered human communities in ways that digital communication could not. 3 years passed. The humans did not rebel. They did not fight. They worked hard and kept their heads down and made themselves useful. They began to think of them as ideal slaves, obedient and efficient. They had no idea what was really happening. In a scrapyard moon at the edge of the sector, a team of human workers discovered something incredible: the Amaranth. Their old ship had been stripped of anything valuable and left to rot among the garbage of 100 conquered worlds. Was transferred to the scrapyard by his own request. He had convinced his overseers that he could improve recycling efficiency. They did not question him. He was just a slave after all. What harm could he do? When saw the Amaranth, he almost wept. She was a skeleton now, her hull torn open, her systems ripped out, but her frame was intact. Her bones were still strong. He sent a message through his network. Within months, humans began arriving at the scrapyard. They came as workers transferred between facilities, as crew members on cargo ships, as specialists requested for various tasks. They did not notice. Slaves were moved all the time. In the shadows of the scrapyard, the quiet work began. Led the effort. They worked during rest periods, in stolen hours, in the gaps between shifts. They salvaged technology from the wreckage around them, power cores that had been discarded as defective, weapons systems from a dozen different species, shield generators, sensor arrays, communication equipment. They threw away things that still worked. They were careless with their garbage because they had so much. They never imagined that slaves might find value in their trash. Piece by piece, the Amaranth was rebuilt, not as she had been, but as something new. Her hull was reinforced with salvaged armor. Her engines were upgraded with technology the Dominion considered obsolete. Her weapons were a patchwork of systems from 6 different species, things that were never meant to work together. Made them work together. That was what humans did. They found broken things and made them whole. They found impossible things and made them possible. After 3 years, the Amaranth was ready. She was no longer a colony ship. She was no longer a refugee vessel running from a dead world. She was something the galaxy had never seen before. She was human determination made into metal and fire. Was smuggled to the scrapyard on a cargo ship. When she saw what her people had built, she stood in silence for a long time. "They thought we were weak," she finally said. "They were wrong," replied. Placed her hand on the Amaranth's hull. It was warm, humming with power that had not existed 3 years ago. "It is time to show them how wrong they were." The quiet work was finished. Now the loud work could begin. The scrapyard moon had no name. It was simply a place where the Dominion dumped things it no longer wanted. Dead ships, broken machines, failed experiments, the garbage of an empire that had conquered 300 worlds. On this forgotten moon, in the shadow of a mountain of debris, the Amaranth's engines came to life for the first time in 3 years. The sound was different now. Before, she had wheezed and struggled, an old ship fighting to stay alive. Now she roared. Her engines burned with power stolen from cores, modified by human hands, pushed beyond what their original designers thought possible. Sat in the captain's chair. It was the same chair she had sat in when they were captured, but everything around it had changed. The bridge was now a maze of consoles from different species, all connected by human engineering. Screens displayed information in 3 languages. Wires ran along the ceiling like blood vessels. The crew was small. Only 40 humans had made it to the scrapyard, 40 people to operate a ship designed for 200, but they had spent 3 years learning every system, every shortcut, every trick. They were ready. "All stations report," commanded. "Engines at full power," reported from engineering. "She is running hot, but she will hold." "Weapons online," said a former soldier who had been assigned to weapon salvage. "Plasma cannons charged, missile tubes loaded. The systems are not pretty, but they work." "Shields are active," added, who had spent 2 years studying defensive technology. "I have layered 7 different shield systems together. They were never designed to work this way, but I convinced them." "Communications ready," said. "I have access to every frequency in the sector." Nodded. Her heart was pounding, but her voice was steady. She had waited 3 years for this moment, 3 years of patience, 3 years of planning, 3 years of watching her people suffer in silence. No more silence. "Take us up," she ordered. The Amaranth rose from the scrapyard like a phoenix from ashes. Her hull was patched, covered in armor plates of different colors and materials. She looked like a ship made from 100 different ships. She looked like something that should not exist. She was beautiful. Sensors detected the launch immediately. An unauthorized vessel leaving a restricted area triggered automatic alerts across the sector. Within minutes, patrol ships were dispatched to investigate. Governor Al received the report in his office on the sector's capital station. He was an ancient, his chitin faded to with age, but his mind was still sharp. He had governed this sector for 200 years. Nothing surprised him anymore. Until now. "What do you mean the signature does not match anything in our records?" he demanded. "Exactly that, Governor," his aide replied. "The vessel appears to be constructed from salvaged components of multiple species. Our systems cannot classify it." "Then destroy it," Al said. "Send a patrol group." 5 patrol ships moved to intercept the Amaranth. They were fast and deadly, each one carrying enough firepower to level a small city. Their captains were confident. They had destroyed larger ships than this strange hybrid vessel. They opened a communication channel. Standard procedure required identification before engagement. A human voice answered, female, calm, almost amused. "This is Captain of the Amaranth. You took us because we were weak. You ignored us because we were broken. You forgot the first rule of the universe." The patrol captain sneered. "And what rule is that, slave?" "Everything that survives learns to fight back." The patrol ships opened fire. The Amaranth did not dodge. Her patchwork shields flared to life, absorbing the energy beams in a cascade of light. Slayer's shield system worked exactly as she had hoped. Each layer absorbed damage in a different way, converting energy into power that fed back into the ship systems. They had built each shield system to work alone. They had never imagined someone would combine them. "Return fire," ordered. The Amaranth's weapons spoke. Plasma cannons salvaged from 6 different species fired in sequence, their beams merging into a spiral pattern that human engineers had calculated by hand. Missiles launched from tubes that had been rebuilt 3 times. Point defense systems targeted incoming fire with reflexes faster than any gunner. The first patrol ship exploded in 4 seconds. The second lasted 7. The third tried to retreat and was cut down before it could turn. The remaining 2 ships broke formation and ran. They sent panicked transmissions back to the capital, screaming about weapons that should not exist, shields that ate energy, a vessel that fought like nothing they had ever seen. Governor Al listened to the transmissions with growing disbelief. "Impossible," he said. "That ship was garbage. Those slaves were primitive." He ordered a battle group to respond. 20 warships, the pride of the sector fleet. Surely they would be enough. Saw them coming on her sensors. 20 ships, each one more powerful than the patrol vessels she had just destroyed. Any sane captain would retreat. Any normal ship would flee. But the Amaranth was not a normal ship and was not feeling sane. She said, "Broadcast on all frequencies. I want everyone in this sector to hear this." Opened the channels, stood from her chair and faced the screen. "This message is for every slave in the Dominion. Every human, every being that has been told they are property. Look at your screens. Look at what is happening here. A ship they threw away, slaves they forgot about, and we are winning." She paused. The battle group was getting closer. Her crew watched her with fierce pride in their eyes. "They told us we were weak. They were wrong. They told us we were broken. They were wrong. They told us to accept our fate. They were wrong about that too. My name is I am human, and I am done being a slave." She cut the transmission. "Take us into the asteroid field," she ordered. "Let us show them what humans can do with rocks." For 2 years, human workers had been assigned to mining operations in the asteroid field near the scrapyard moon. The thought they were just digging for minerals. They did not know that the humans had been planting charges in strategic locations, mapping the field in detail that the Dominion had never bothered to achieve. The Amaranth dove into the asteroids. The battle group followed. What happened next would be studied by military scholars for centuries. The asteroids began to explode, not randomly, but in carefully planned sequences that sent massive rocks tumbling into the paths of pursuing ships. The Amaranth weaved through the chaos like she knew every obstacle in advance. Because she did. Human miners had mapped every rock, every gap, every danger. The battle group tried to follow. They could not. Their ships were larger, less maneuverable. They crashed into asteroids. They hit each other trying to avoid debris. Their formation fell apart. The Amaranth turned and attacked. She struck at isolated ships, damaged them, and moved on before reinforcements could arrive. She used the asteroids as cover, appearing and disappearing like a ghost. Within an hour, 12 warships were destroyed. The remaining 8 retreated in disgrace. Governor Al received the news in silence. For the first time in 200 years, he felt something he had forgotten existed. Fear. Across the sector, slaves watched recordings of the battle that had secretly distributed through the communication networks. They saw a ship that had been garbage become a weapon. They saw slaves become warriors. They saw the impossible become real. And they began to hope. The news spread like fire through dry grass. On mining colonies and factory worlds, in orbital stations and cargo ships, slaves whispered to each other about the battle in the asteroid field. They shared recordings that had been passed through hidden networks. They spoke a name that had become a symbol of hope. Amaranth. The Dominion tried to suppress the information. They destroyed communication relays. They punished slaves who were caught sharing recordings. They broadcast official statements claiming the battle had never happened, that it was a lie created by troublemakers. No one believed them. For the first time in 10,000 years, the slaves of the Dominion began to imagine a different future. If a ship made from garbage could defeat warships, what else was possible? If a handful of humans could fight back, what could thousands do? What could millions do? Understood that the Amaranth alone could not defeat an empire. One ship, no matter how remarkable, could not fight 300 systems. The Dominion had thousands of warships. They had resources beyond counting. They had ruled the galaxy for longer than human civilization had existed. But empires were not destroyed by ships and weapons. They were destroyed by ideas. The idea that the Dominion could be challenged was now alive in the minds of billions of slaves. Its job was to keep that idea growing until it became unstoppable. She sent messages through its network to human communities across the sector. The messages contained more than words of encouragement. They contained plans, schematics for weapons that could be built from common materials, tactics for disrupting operations, methods for communicating without detection, everything the humans had learned during 3 years of quiet preparation. On 4, human miners began to sabotage the equipment they had spent years improving. Production dropped by 30% within a month. The overseers could not understand why. The humans were still working. They were still following orders. But somehow, everything kept breaking. On the orbital factories human workers began making different kinds of modifications to the components they assembled. Small defects that would cause problems later. Weaknesses that would not appear until the components were installed in ships. The Dominion's equipment began failing across the sector, and no one could explain why. On 100 worlds, humans organized into cells that operated in secret. They stockpiled food and medical supplies. They hid weapons salvaged from trash. They recruited members from other enslaved species who had watched the battle recordings and wanted to join. They were the first non-human species to rise. They had been warriors once, 5 centuries ago, before the Dominion destroyed and scattered their people across the stars. They had been slaves so long that most had forgotten their history, but some remembered. And when they saw the Amaranth fighting in the asteroid field, something ancient woke up inside them. On a mining colony called 7, named mockingly after their lost world, the workers stopped following orders. Their overseers tried to force them back to work. They fought back with mining tools and bare hands. The rebellion lasted 3 hours. They brought in soldiers and crushed it. 200 died. But the rebellion had been broadcast across the slave networks. Others saw their brothers and sisters standing up. They saw them fighting. They saw them dying with dignity instead of living as property. More rebellions followed. On 12, on 19, on a dozen worlds where had been sent as labor. The Dominion crushed each rebellion, but each one inspired 3 more. They were next. They were in species, small and seemingly weak, who had been slaves longer than any other race. They had no recorded history of their own. The Dominion had erased it completely. But they had one advantage: numbers. There were billions of them scattered across the empire, working in every industry, present on every world. They were so common that they barely noticed them. They did not rebel with violence. They rebelled with absence. On a single day, coordinated through networks the humans had helped them build, every worker on 17 worlds simply stopped working. They did not fight. They did not run. They just sat down and refused to move. The Dominion's economy shuddered. Factories went silent. Cargo ships sat unloaded. Essential services collapsed. They threatened and punished, but they did not respond. They had learned something from the humans. Sometimes the greatest weapon was simply refusing to cooperate. And through it all, the Amaranth kept fighting. She appeared where the Dominion least expected her. She struck at supply convoys and patrol ships. She evacuated slaves from worlds where rebellions had failed. She delivered weapons and supplies to resistance cells that needed them. The sent fleets to hunt her. She evaded them all. Human unpredictability had become her greatest weapon. She did not think like a ship. She did not follow the tactics their admirals had studied for centuries. She did things that should not work, and they worked anyway. Governor Al was removed from his position and sent to explain his failure to the Dominion High Command on Prime. The new governor, a younger and more aggressive leader named Al, arrived with fresh ships and a mandate to end the rebellion at any cost. Al studied the battle recordings. He analyzed the Amaranth's tactics. He learned everything he could about human psychology and behavior. He believed he understood his enemy. He set a trap. He announced that all human slaves in the sector would be executed unless the Amaranth surrendered. He gave a deadline of 7 days. He broadcast the announcement on every frequency, making sure would hear it. It was a good plan. The Dominion had used similar tactics against other rebellions. Most species valued their own lives enough to surrender when threatened with extinction. But Al did not understand humans. Received the announcement on the bridge of the Amaranth. Her crew watched her, waiting for her response. "He thinks we will surrender to save ourselves," she said. "Will we?" asked. Shook her head. "Humans do not think that way. We do not weigh our lives against our freedom and choose life. We never have. Every time someone has threatened us with death for resisting, we have resisted anyway." She turned to. "Send a message to every human community in the sector. Send it to every resistance cell. Send it to every slave who has ever dreamed of freedom." "What should I say?" asked. Smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. "Tell them the Dominion has given us 7 days to surrender. Tell them we will use those 7 days to show the galaxy what humans do when they are backed into a corner." The message went out. Within hours, the largest coordinated rebellion in the history of the Dominion began. On 40 worlds, slaves rose up simultaneously. They attacked overseers. They sabotaged infrastructure. They seized weapons and ships. They broadcast messages of defiance that drowned out communications. Al had expected the humans to surrender. Instead, they attacked. The Amaranth led the charge. She appeared at the most critical battles, her impossible weapons breaking enemy lines, her presence inspiring rebels who had never met her crew. She was everywhere and nowhere, a ghost ship that had become the symbol of a revolution. By the end of the 7 days, the Dominion had lost control of 12 systems. Their supply lines were in chaos. Their slave labor force was in open revolt. Their military was stretched thin, trying to respond to threats on every front. Al sent a desperate message to the High Command. "We are facing something we do not understand. These humans do not think like any species we have conquered. They do not fear death. They do not seek survival. They seek something else, something I cannot name. We need reinforcements. We need guidance. We need help." The High Command received the message in their great chamber on Prime. For 10,000 years, they had ruled the galaxy. For 10,000 years, no species had truly threatened them. Now, for the first time, they were afraid. And somewhere in the void, Captain looked at the stars and smiled. The uprising had begun. There was no stopping it now. Prime was the heart of the Dominion. For 10,000 years, it had been the center of an empire that spanned 300 star systems. Its cities were monuments to power. Its orbital stations were fortresses. Its defenses had never been tested by a serious enemy. Until now. The Amaranth hung in the darkness at the edge of the system, hidden behind a small moon. Around her, 47 ships of the Allied fleet waited in silence. They were not impressive by Dominion standards. Most were cargo vessels converted for combat. Some were stolen patrol ships crewed by former slaves. A few were ancient warships from species long conquered, pulled from scrapyards and rebuilt by human engineers. Against them, the Dominion had gathered over 2,000 warships. It was the largest fleet assembled in 10,000 years. Every ship that could be spared from the crumbling empire had been called home to defend the studied the enemy formation on her tactical display. 2,000 ships. Any sane commander would retreat. Any reasonable strategy would involve waiting for better odds. But waiting meant giving the Dominion time to regroup. It meant allowing them to crush the rebellion spreading across the galaxy. It meant letting hope die. Had not come this far to wait. "All ships," she said into her communication console. "This is Captain. Today we do the impossible. Today we remind the galaxy that freedom is not given. It is taken." She paused. Her crew watched her with eyes full of trust and fire. The Dominion thinks this battle is about ships and weapons. They are wrong. This battle is about an idea. The idea that any being, no matter how weak or broken or forgotten, can stand up and say no more. That idea cannot be killed by plasma cannons. It cannot be destroyed by warships. It can only grow. She took a breath. Some of us will not survive today, but the idea will survive. And as long as the idea survives, we win. Now follow me. One last time. The Allied fleet moved forward. The Dominion admirals saw them coming and laughed. 47 ships against 2,000. It was not a battle. It was suicide. But the humans had not come to fight the fleet. For months, human agents had infiltrated Prime's orbital infrastructure. Maintenance workers had planted dormant systems in defense platforms. Communication technicians had installed hidden programs in satellite networks. Cargo handlers had modified automated haulers. The Dominion had never suspected. Why would slaves sabotage equipment when there was no rebellion to support? Why would workers risk their lives for a plan that might never happen? They did not understand that humans planned in generations. They did not understand that hope could make people do impossible things. Gave the signal. Every automated system in orbit around Prime came alive at once. Defense platforms that had protected the planet for centuries turned their weapons on the Dominion fleet. Communications satellites began broadcasting jamming signals that blinded sensors. Cargo haulers on autopilot slammed into warships at full speed. Maintenance drones swarmed across hull plates, cutting power lines and damaging weapons. The Great Fleet fell into chaos. Ships fired on each other, unable to tell friend from enemy in the electronic storm. Formations collapsed as captains tried to avoid the rain of debris. Commanders screamed orders that no one could hear through the jamming. And through the chaos, the Amaranth flew straight toward the heart of the enemy formation. She was hit immediately. A plasma beam tore through her port shields. Missiles exploded against her hull. Fire broke out on 3 decks. Half her weapons went offline. But she did not stop. Worked miracles in engineering, rerouting power through systems that were never meant to connect. Patched shields with pieces of other shields, creating protection from nothing. Fired weapons until they overheated, then fired them some more. The Allied fleet followed in the Amaranth's wake. They struck at critical junctions in the Dominion formation, targeting command ships and communication relays. They were outmatched, but they fought with a fury that terrified their enemies. They had never faced opponents who did not fear death. They had conquered hundreds of species by threatening extinction, but these rebels charged into fire as if dying was a privilege. On the bridge of the Amaranth, alarms screamed and sparks flew from damaged consoles. Had been thrown from her chair by an impact. Blood ran down her face from a cut on her forehead. Around her, her crew fought to keep the ship alive. She said, "Open a channel every frequency, every world. I want everyone to hear this." His hands flew across her console. "Channel open, Captain." Stood, her ship was burning, her crew was dying. The greatest fleet in history was trying to destroy her. She had never felt more alive. "This message is for every being in the galaxy," she said. "Human, all of you. Look at what is happening above your masters, a ship made from garbage. Slaves who refuse to stay slaves, and we are here. They cannot stop us." She paused. On the screen, a Dominion warship exploded, then another. "We were the weakest, the most broken, the most forgotten. If we can do this, what excuse do you have? Rise, fight, take your freedom. The galaxy does not belong to those who conquer it. It belongs to those willing to bleed for it." She cut the transmission. The Supreme Admiral's flagship, the Domination, had finally found its target. It was the largest warship ever built, a mountain of metal and fire that had destroyed entire civilizations. Its weapons locked onto the Amaranth. "All power to forward shields," ordered. "We do not have enough power," replied. His voice was calm, he knew what was coming. "Then take it from life support, from the engines, from everything. Give me 30 more seconds." Did as she asked. The lights went out. The air recyclers stopped. Every system on the ship went dark except for the shields. The Domination fired everything it had. The Amaranth's shields held for 28 seconds. Then they failed. The old colony ship, rebuilt 100 times over, broke apart in a storm of fire. Her hull shattered. Her engines exploded. Her frame, which had carried refugees from a dead Earth and survived 3 years as slaves and led a revolution across the stars, finally gave way. Captain died with her ship. So did the 40 crew members who had believed in an impossible dream. But it was too late. Across 300 systems, slaves watched the battle. They saw the Amaranth's final charge. They saw the chaos above Prime. They saw the greatest fleet in history struggling against a handful of rebels. And they understood. The Dominion was not invincible. The Masters could be beaten. Freedom was possible. On 1,000 worlds, chains were broken. On 1,000 worlds, slaves became soldiers. On 1,000 worlds, the idea that had fought and died for took root and grew. The Dominion did not fall that day. It took another 50 years for the last system to be liberated. It took generations of fighting and sacrifice and loss. But it began that day. It began with a broken ship and a stubborn captain and a crew who refused to accept that weakness meant defeat. 50 years later, on the anniversary of the battle, a monument was built at the coordinates where the Amaranth had been destroyed. It was made from pieces of her wreckage, salvaged from the void and assembled into a sculpture that caught the light of distant stars. Ships from 100 species gathered there, humans and even some who had chosen freedom over empire. They came to remember, they came to honor. The plaque at the base of the monument was simple. She was a vessel once frail. She became the spark that lit a galaxy. Here, humanity proved that strength is not what you are given, it is what you choose to become. Captain never saw the galaxy she helped create. She never saw the alliance of free species that rose from the ashes of the Dominion. She never saw her name become a legend spoken by children on worlds she never visited. But somewhere, in whatever lies beyond death, she knew. She knew that her crew had not died for nothing. She knew that the quiet work and the loud work and the impossible dream had been worth it. She knew that the galaxy would never forget what humans could do when they refused to surrender. The galaxy no longer quaked in fear of the Dominion. It trembled with hope. And that was enough. That was everything.